Welcome to Research Methodology. This is Module 4, and in this module we'll be looking at statistical analysis, discussion on our data, and also drawing conclusions to our study. In this module we will be briefly examining some of the various important measures of statistical analysis and hypothesis testing. We'll also be looking at the importance of acknowledging limitations to our study, also discussing the results of our data analysis, and from that drawing conclusions and, if need be, recommendations from our study. Statistical analysis requires us to use statistics, and it is presumed that students that are doing research at a graduate level have already covered the study of statistics both at an undergraduate and graduate level, so we won't be in this module going into details about how to calculate particular statistics. But for those of you who wish to refresh your knowledge of statistics, there are some excellent basic statistics texts and also websites available to those that need to revise. And we have listed here some of the very simple and interactive websites that are available to help research students both revise and understand some of the important statistical measures that need to be done in common quantitative research. We have listed here, however, some of the important measures that students need to look at. They need to be familiar with frequency distributions to understand how data is organised and finding a measure of centre. Averages are always important to know where most of the data lies. So measures of centre and frequency distributions are important basic statistics to be available with. Measures of variation, of course, knowing how far data varies from the mean or from the average is important. So being able to calculate, understand and explain standard deviations is also important. Measures of relative standing as well. The calculation of Z-scores is important. Basic probability is important to revise too, because we need to be able to do some probability distributions, calculating random variables and binomial distributions. Also, we need to be able to do some basic statistics in relation to sampling and estimating. This is important, of course, with sampling, sample size and selection of our samples, deciding what percentage of the population we are going to test. And most importantly, we need to be able to understand the basics of hypothesis testing, because as we said earlier, when we set our research questions, we also form some hypotheses about what we guess to be the outcome. So we need to be able to test outcomes to see whether our hypotheses are supported or not supported. So we need to be able to understand the statistics of being able to do that. And of course correlation and regression are very important too, because correlation is about seeing relationships. Is there a strong or a weak relationship between variables? And this, of course, is a very, very important statistic to be able to understand. Today, researchers don't have to be too focused upon the calculation side of things, because there are many computer software packages that will do the calculations for us. For example, in Excel or SPSS, the calculations will be done. All we need to do is feed the data in. The calculations will be done. The important thing to do as research students is to know what calculation we need to do and to understand what the calculation means. The calculation is done, a result is given. What does it mean? And how does it affect our study? What do the calculations mean to us in terms of what we are studying and what sort of relationships we are trying to understand in our study? In our theses, we should have a separate section entitled Limitations. Limitations to our study, limitations to our research. Now, this is an important section because it gives an honest and a thoughtful presentation of any significant methodology or implementation problems that we faced in our studies. Now, many students get a little bit concerned about this section, and they think that this section takes away from the positive impact of their study. They seem to think that it weakens their study, it lessens their study. It's an acknowledgement that their study is far from perfect. Well, what we need to do and realise as researchers that our study is always far from perfect. As we go along in our study, we realise that perhaps there are factors that we should have considered. There are limitations to the data that we collected, that we faced all sorts of problems. Now, this is a section where we acknowledge these problems. And a good, thoughtful, honest limitation section will not take from our study, but will enhance our study. It will show us that we are honest and thoughtful and open researchers because we see and acknowledge the limitations of our study. But most importantly, what it does is it's helpful for future researchers. Often researchers find a research topic in this particular area of other researchers' theses. It's often a good place actually to start if you're looking for a topic. Look at someone's thesis, go to the limitation section, find out what their limitations were, because this may be an opportunity for you to redo the research and take into considerations the limitations that the previous researcher faced and make good those limitations, overcome those limitations within your study. So make sure that this area is well handled because it is a very, very important part of the study. Discussion of the results or the findings of our results, the findings from our data collection and from our data analysis is perhaps the most important part of our thesis, but it certainly is going to be the longest part of your thesis. Because in this section what we do is we explain the data. It's very important. We explain the data, what we've found. And in this section we don't draw interpretations or conclusions at all. All we do is we say what the data has told us. In presenting these findings, in presenting our data, it's a good idea to use charts and graphics and tables and make our presentation as simple as possible. Only discuss data that is relevant to your research problem and questions. Don't get yourself involved in side issues. There may be other things that you have discovered through your research, but don't put it in this area, because what you're doing is you're discussing data in relation to your research and the problems that you are, or the questions that you are seeking to answer. And also in this section, this is the area where you discuss whether the data supports or does not support your hypothesis. So remember, the finding section is about explaining the data, not drawing interpretations, not drawing conclusions. You will have an opportunity to do that in another section. In the summary section of your thesis, what you will be doing is providing a brief statement of the essential findings of your data. Now, this can be broken up into particular sections because obviously you'll have different findings about different, perhaps different areas, different variables. So in this concluding section, put it in a format which is firstly in summary and secondly can easily be understood. Now remember that findings state facts. We said before that the findings section is factually looking at what the data says. Now in your conclusion section you will be drawing inferences, you'll be drawing some sort of ideas, some sort of implications from your findings. So let's sum up again what we're looking at. The findings section analyses your data and is factual. Your summary section is a summary of your findings, and your conclusion section is taking these findings and drawing the inferences or the implications of what your findings means to your study. Your conclusion section, as we said, is drawing some inferences, making some comments, drawing out what your data means, and perhaps expressing your own opinions about what the findings mean. Some theses require recommendations to be made. Now, it often depends on whether you're doing theoretical work or whether you're doing applied research. But the recommendation section normally is the area where you give a few ideas as to how the findings and the conclusions that you draw from your studies can require corrective action to be taken. Now, if we were looking at customer complaints and how they're handled, it may be that we draw some conclusions about recommendations about perhaps further training for staff, and we might make some recommendations about how the process of customer complaints handling could be changed as a result of our findings and our conclusions. In academic research, the recommendations section is normally about further study suggestions, recommendations for further research. In other words, it says this is what we've found, but if we looked at particular areas, perhaps looked at other variables, perhaps went about the research project in a different way, we could perhaps test our understanding further. So in academic research or pure research, the recommendation section is normally called further study suggestions, further research suggestions. Whereas in applied research, where managerial action is required as a result of our research, the recommendation section will be recommendations for managerial action. In other words, what needs to be done, what needs to be changed that can help and assist the company in its in solving the particular problem that you've looked at. This now takes us to the end of the 4-module section on research methodology. We trust that this video presentation will help supplement your further reading and understanding in this area of research methodology. We trust that you have gained some new insights into the whole process of research. We hope that this has helped to simplify your understanding of what is involved in doing research and putting together the theses. We suggest that in any areas that you're not sure of, find a good textbook, go to the web and do specific studies to fill in any gaps in your knowledge. We wish you every success in the completion of your thesis. Thank you.